All right, the recording is in progress. So um, for those of you just joining, be sure to access the digital agenda here at that link. We will continue to post that in the chat. Nina can do that for us. So you can always join in later and access this digital agenda. And what you will see when you find the digital agenda, you will see this organization in which it lays out the plan for this afternoon. We're together for the next hour to hour and a half, but I'll let you out early if you stay engaged with me. And there's the purpose of us coming together to discuss a root cause analysis and look at potential drivers for low student motivation, and then explore how these root causes can help us build more impactful interventions. But you'll see that this agenda is laid out, and Nina, let me know, can you see the agenda right now instead of the slide deck?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So you'll see that we have a heading, and if you would go ahead and take this pre-assessment, if you click on that link, and they're like 3 quick questions. So that just helps us in reporting for our grant and keeping us employed. So be sure to complete that pre-assessment for us. And then you'll see some links around implementation science, because we'll be discussing this concept of a root cause analysis. And then student motivation, some general information on that topic, but then our top 3 approaches to addressing low student motivation. So which would be encouraging competency, belonging, and autonomy. So I'll be giving you some specific resources that you'll take away from this session and be able to immediately use tomorrow. So I hope to give you kind of this larger overview and this concept of like tackling the problem from a systemic point of view, but also some really grassroots implementation strategies that you can take back to your classroom tomorrow. So that's the plan for the afternoon. And we will jump right in. Okay, so you're taking the pre-assessment. I hope everyone has done so. That's super helpful to us, gives us some feedback about where you stand on things. And that pre-assessment, again, is at the top link. And maybe, Nina, if you easily can pull that up, adding a link to the pre-assessment in the chat would be super helpful too. So be sure to do that. And I would encourage you, you're going to probably keep a couple of tabs open for our session this afternoon to help us kind of learn together, because we're going to do an online kind of brainstorming activity as well. So if you have the tab open of our Zoom meeting, a tab open for the Digging Deeper digital agenda, and then I'll be giving you one more resource to access here soon. So this is our plan for the afternoon. I just shared that with you on the digital agenda. But to get us started, before I even discuss student motivation and strategies for addressing this, you are going to hop over and you will find this link here, the root cause analysis collaborative brainstorming. So we used to do this on Jamboard, for those of you who are familiar with Jamboard. So I've kind of made like my own Jamboard. So if you would go to this link right here, and Nina, maybe you can add that link to the chat. She'll be our chat link provider. And when you do that, that is going to take you to a slide deck, basically, that in essence is built. I'm building my own Jamboard. So hopefully I'm going to see a few people populate over here. And what I would like you to do is grab one of these Post-its right here, just drag it around and add a comment on there about what you think a possible driver is. Like, what's a reason that students have low motivation? So if everyone would take a moment. Again, you will access this through the digital agenda and this root cause analysis collaborative brainstorming link, and that will take you to this slide deck here. Grab a Post-it note, move it around, and type in your ideas. And so hopefully we can see a few people start to make some edits on this document. I'll give you all a few minutes to do so. And so the best way to kind of keep us all here is just to grab one of those Post-its and start making your notes. Good job. I see somebody already starting writing their ideas, with maybe lack of support at home being a possible driver. And go ahead and add a few more if you have ideas, because we're going to explore these more and start like maybe pushing back on these first initial assumptions that we may make. No connections at school. I love this idea that you've already brought up around connectedness. Maybe they don't know what to do or what exactly you want them to do. Maybe they're struggling academically with the content. So I love that you all are already thinking about these things. And clearly, if you're here, this is something that you personally are potentially dealing with, unfortunately, in your school or in your classroom. Maybe they don't see the value or relevance of the classes to their lives. Okay, keep jotting those down because we're going to come back to those in a moment. And to do that, I want to give you just some really quick updated information about what the research tells us around motivation, but along with like motivation, absenteeism like intersects so closely with that. I wanted to give you the most recent data around chronic absenteeism. That means that a student, to be chronically absent, you're missing at least 10% of the school year. So first of all, the number of chronically absent students has doubled from 2018 to 2022. That's over 14 million students across the US. And the primary drivers of that they're finding are these barriers to attendance, maybe even aversions to school specifically, in general disengagement, boredom. And some of families even have some misconceptions around attendance. And I personally have an 18-year-old and am very aware of how often she wants to just not go to school that day. And maybe this other priority makes her want to skip school that day. And as a family member, I can see how we could even think, what's 2 days a month really even matter? But we all know as educators that being present at school has a big impact on their performance, academic performance, and their later outcomes. But the bad news is for our kids that are chronically absent, this impacts students mostly, especially especially exponentially impacting our students in poverty, students of color, and those experiencing homelessness. So some recent data that came out of the Ed Week, they do a big national survey. And so I wanted to share just a couple of responses. And you'll see this first light blue response for students is about how do you feel that, like, how motivated do you think you are? Whereas the darker blue is how motivated do educators think students are? And so you can see the responses there. And the bottom line is motivation is a problem, both perceived by staff, but also by students. And when they ask students, what could your schools do to increase your motivation? Take a few minutes and look at the responses that they gave. So we see comments about relevance and about engagement and about specific instructional feedback. And so I thought that was really, I don't know, at the same time I'm pulling these data, I'm pulling what the research tells us to do to increase motivation, and they really go hand in hand. So I'm going to give you some specific ways to do those things. But before we do that, I want to introduce this concept of a root cause analysis because I want to give you this like larger systemic approach that you could take within your school. So let's say you're a teacher, a special ed teacher or a gen ed teacher, and you're like, look, I can only control my classroom. That is true. But can you be a teacher leader and lean into some of the practices in your building to like investigate this further and to challenge ourselves to improve the system? Because it's really easy to start to feel overwhelmed, like this is out of my control. This is a family issue. The student just really doesn't care. I can't make him care. So this is going to help us to view that differently. So really all a root cause analysis is, it's a structured approach to analyzing problems within a complex system, okay? So this is like used in business organizations and things like that. And one specific way that I have found to be really practical and doable in a school environment, and I should have started with an introduction, so we're going to do that in a second. So I've worked in many schools over the years, and one of the practices that you could actually do, because everybody's very busy and it's hard to stop and back up and problem solve. But one root cause analysis approach you can use is what's called a fishbone diagram. And so I'm going to walk you through a fishbone diagram to give you an idea of how you actually could implement a root cause analysis in your building. So maybe you could partner with your PBIS team in your building, or with a leadership team, or even within your PLC or department to do this kind of activity. So before we continue, I jumped in and did not even introduce myself. So let's do that. I'm Christy Bryce. I was a special education teacher many years ago. I became a school psychologist and then was a director of intervention. I'm over in the western side of the state in Bowling Green, Kentucky, but I currently work for University of Louisville with the Kentucky ABRE team. So we're funded out of OSEAL. We provide support for schools and districts across the state around special education practices. So this directly affects our students with disabilities, but it also affects many of the other kids that are sitting before you in your classrooms. And so that's a quick background check for myself. So that's why I'm talking about practical ways to support you in the school and in the classroom. All right, so let's keep rolling. So what the heck is a fishbone diagram? So when you look at this model, this is in essence what a fishbone diagram could look like. So you can see the idea that it is the bones of a fish. And how you would use this is you would be considering things like, let's look at the larger system and what might be driving a particular problem that we're having. And so it's really a powerful way to stop, because in school systems, we're so busy. We have this problem. We want to just start this new thing. And this says stop and let's think about it. What kinds of drivers of this problem might there be that we need to consider? Are there policies that are driving this? Are there certain staff or people, or is the environment? What other reasons might be behind this problem? So, for example, I've done this a lot with schools dealing with high rates of disciplinary removals. So let's imagine the question that a school might ask themselves. We have high numbers of students being removed from the classroom for disciplinary reasons. Why is that? And so really what a root cause analysis is, this idea of asking why over and over to dig down deeper. So we're about to talk about motivation, but I want to give you this model through this other example. So you're asking yourself this big question as a school team. Why do we have high numbers of students being removed for disciplinary reasons? Well, some of the first things I often hear when we ask questions like that, we're like, well, kids are acting up, or I don't know if the families even care. Those are often these quick responses people will give to a question like that. So the next step in the, like, let's write it down. Sure, let's write that down as a possible driver. But what the root cause analysis does is say, let's push deeper into that cause. Why would it be that parents don't care? Well, I'll hear them say things like, well, the parents may have had poor school experiences themselves. Maybe they don't speak English. Why else do kids act up? Well, maybe they aren't good readers and able to hang with the content. Or maybe there really aren't clear expectations in the classroom, or they differ from class to class. So now we're starting to get a little bit deeper around things that maybe as a school we can do something about. So how we frame the problems affects how we create the solutions. So let's look at that. I heard, this idea when I asked the question, why do we have more discipline? Well, the families had poor school experiences themselves. And when we say that, we're like, see, there's nothing I can do about that. Like, that's in the past, Christy. That's something out of my control. Like, it feels like it's just an issue in society I have nothing to do with. So we can reframe that to say, okay, that may be true. But what else that tells us is maybe families haven't had discrepant experiences with the school to counter those beliefs. So think about that for a second, what we just did, how we just reframed that problem and actually brought it more into our locus of control. So if families haven't had discrepant experiences, like different experiences that counter these early experiences they had, then what can we do about that? Well, maybe the family doesn't feel like the school cares about them. Maybe they just can't get to school events that are in the evening. Maybe they aren't sure how to help their children. And so when we keep digging further and further, we keep asking, well, why and why? We start to get down deeper into these specific things that we as a school could possibly do something about, such as one school district I work with that we did this activity. They created a structure in which they went to a particular neighborhood that was most disconnected. And they started going to the housing authority in that neighborhood. They eventually set up a bus in that neighborhood that went there, and teachers started visiting. They taught families how to use Infinite Campus. They did tutoring, things like this. So by digging deeper, and reframing the problem, they started building more impactful interventions rather than just getting stuck in, well, families have had poor experiences. So I say all this to say, like, by digging deeper, you can create better interventions for motivation. So let's do one more example before we do motivation. All right, we said, what's a reason that we're removing kids for disciplinary reasons? Well, they're acting up. Okay, well, why is that? One reason they might act up is because they have difficult reading. They're in an 8th grade classroom and they're reading at a 3rd grade level, and that impedes their engagement. So then we say, well, why is that? Why do they have difficulty reading? Well, maybe it's that the students with the lowest reading skills are missing a lot due to disciplinary removal. Maybe the student doesn't get any kind of reading intervention. We don't have that in our school. Or maybe our teachers or gen ed teachers struggle to know how to scaffold text in the classroom. So like now we've started saying there are things we could do to address a student not getting reading intervention. There are things we can do to help teachers know scaffolding techniques to lift up students that have lower reading level in the school and differentiate in their classroom. So we're not going to get stuck in these first instinctual answers and assumptions about why something is happening. Instead, we're going to ask ourselves why again, and dig deeper. All right, so by doing that, we're going to practice this. We said, okay, some reasons why that students have low motivation. And we said, no connections at school, no support at home, struggling with the content. All right, let's dig a little deeper into one of these. So I'm going to take a moment. Gets more from the peers if they misbehave. Okay. Let's dig a little deeper into struggling with content. Possible, and by doing this is how we're going to do this. I'm going to add in a statement. So we're going to dig deeper into, and I think the term was struggling with content. Possible root causes for students struggling with content. All right, if you all would grab another sticky note and drag it out here and make your notes about possible reasons students might be struggling with the content. What are some reasons our students might struggle with content? I'm cracking up at that anonymous Dumbo octopus. I love how Google assigned these crazy names. Oh, so they lack foundational skills. What are other reasons? Missing too much school. Isn't that a case where, like, is it the chicken or the egg, which comes first, you know? The relationships with the teachers. So you guys are seeing this, that there are like reasons that students may be struggling with the content that may be leading to these like low student motivation. Their behavior impedes their learning. So you're really setting me up for what we want to talk about then. Here's a quick background about what we know, what the research tells us. Oops, sorry. Trying to get us out of full screen mode here. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure why it's doing that. We know that even though families obviously play a huge role in a student's life, teachers are the main variable in the classroom, and they are a necessary ingredient for motivating students to learn. And I have attached in your digital agenda a study, a kind of a summary of a study from Bureau, in which it was from 2022, so very current, in which the three key ways to meet psychological needs of students so that that increases their motivation in school is to increase their competency, feelings of belonging, and autonomy. So we're going to spend the rest of this afternoon talking about competency, belonging, and autonomy. And you all were tapping into that when you said, oh, maybe one reason there's low motivation is because they're struggling academically. Well, that's a question of competency. And competency doesn't mean I already have the skills. Instead, competency means that I have this belief that I'm capable of learning this. And the quote that's used in Bureau is, if you start doing a task and it's a new task and you feel competent in it, and you feel connected with others, you feel autonomous in doing the task, you've chosen to do it. You'll have fun doing it. You'll want to do it more, and you'll be interested in learning. And so I think about pickleball. Pickleball has been a recent activity that I have attempted to do. And when I play pickleball, I had some little lessons to teach me. I was building some skills where I'm starting to think like, okay, 'cause I'm not exactly the most athletic person, but like maybe I could hang in there. Also, I feel connected to people. I have a lot of friends who play this, so it makes me want to do this. So when you have these feelings of competency and this belief that you're capable of doing it, you're more likely to do so. However, if we're put in situations in which we fail over and over and over again, I think about our students that have experienced this over years. Honestly, the strength it must take to come to school every day is impressive. And we often place these judgments on these students about not being motivated when actually maybe they've had this lack of competency, experiences of lack of competency and belonging and autonomy for years. So how do we encourage competency? And you all were talking about academic skills. So here's some more bad news. 68% of 8th grade students at the most recent NAEP scores are reading below grade level. So that is completely disheartening. I'm really proud of Kentucky for a lot of the work they're doing around literacy right now. So hopefully these numbers will improve, at least within our state. But that is the present reality. So I'm going to share a great little TikTok video that I think does an excellent job of introducing the concept of scaffolding. So scaffolding meaning that we want to teach at a high level, but sometimes we have to provide this extra support to help everyone reach this high level. This video does not have sound, but it's just a quick little fun video to watch to introduce this idea of scaffolding. So dad's going to teach son to make a snow angel. He demonstrated. Now he's doing some actual prompting. Needs a little more intensive support. All right, so I don't know if they ever made the snow angel, but I think that that's a beautiful example of how we just know as humans that sometimes we all need a little extra help. And so I want to share these visuals with you to introduce this concept of scaffolding, because one of the ways that we can increase competency is helping a student when they're, let's say it's a student with a disability, when they're in their gen ed classroom, or a student that's in intervention. Dick Allington's art, What Really Matters in RTI book says it's great and all that you get that 30 minutes a day that's actually at your instructional level and you actually can hang in there and know and understand what's happening. But what really matters is the other 6.5 hours of the day. And so we want to be thinking about how can we help our teachers, especially gen ed teachers who have this huge range of students, both from gifted to students with disabilities, to students who just struggle without an IEP or 504 that need this support. So when we walk into a classroom and we see that we have all these students before us, we're really excited and enthusiastic with this high level goal that we're working towards. But then we find out that there are students sitting before us that are below grade level and a long way from this high rigorous goal that we're working towards. So what we don't want to do is lower the goal. And sometimes, and as a special ed teacher, I found myself doing that, lowering the goal. Instead, what we want to do is maintain this high expectation, but then we have to build in scaffolding. And by design, scaffolding is this temporary support. So we want to build in this scaffolding to help the student reach this high level. That is one way, just one way, that we can ensure competency. So how can we do that? So here are a few specific research evidence-based practices. One is high dosage tutoring being tied to the classroom. And so that can look a lot of ways. And what I want to point out about most of these is it's not about lowering expectations. Instead, it's about highly effective teachers being very aware of what grade level expectations are and seeking strategies to aid the student to reach those. So using early warning system, using avoiding retention. I want to jump over here to the digital agenda to cue you to a few specific strategies that I've shared in the encourage competency section. And just so you know, if you want to dig a little deeper into what the research says about motivation, there's a summary of Bureau's most recent study, but then along with a couple of other, I think, pretty easy to read and helpful resources on what it takes to motivate our kids. But here are some of the specific tools you could use to encourage competency. And so when we say scaffolding, people are like, well, exactly what do you mean when you say that? So let's take a look at one of these resources. This is one of my favorites. A lot of these come from Achieve the Core, which I think is a great resource. Scaffolds to support English language learners, but that could also be just students with disabilities that have language challenges or a low-performing student who has some language difficulties. So what can we do? Here are specific examples. We can utilize sentence frames or sentence starters. So when we give an assignment, we actually hand out on a little Post-it note sentence starters such as, all right, guys, when you're working with your buddy and you're analyzing this text, I want you to use these sentence starters. So it says, for example, I anticipate that blank causes blank. Or I think that blank might blank because I know that blank. So you can see how you can use sentence starters for helping them analyze, explain, use cause and effect. So these are great examples of super practical ways to bring in sentence starters as one scaffolding tool in the classroom. So it's keeping these expectations high, but it's helping students that maybe need additional language support. You can also use signal words. You can use graphic organizers, word banks, like the list is long. So this is just one example of a really practical tool to bring scaffolding into your classroom. I've also linked here Google Tools for supporting all learners. So now, especially with AI, the options are endless. Back in the day when we had to differentiate and find leveled text, for example, like I want students to read about this particular topic in physics. Well, now you can use tools like Diffit, for example, or a few of these others I've included here, Breaking News English, Wonderopolis, News in Levels, Kentucky text sets for differentiation, differentiated reading activities. Many of these will provide this differentiated reading levels for you. And so it's so much easier than it used to be back in the day. So I just wanted to share with you some of the really quick tools that we could use to encourage competency, especially through scaffolding. All right, so let's hop back in. One other piece of research I want to share with you. Back in the day when I was a special ed coach, and I remember working with special ed teachers, and we really struggled. And this goes the same for intervention teachers. How do we accelerate students? And one of the questions we would often come up with is, do we need to spend our time reteaching and reviewing or doing homework help? Like when we have this kid maybe for an extra 30-minute block, what needs to happen during that time? And so the research is telling us that instead of doing reteaching or even pre-teaching, previewing is a much stronger way to do that. So how do we preview? So I want you all to think for a second about when you see a movie trailer, what kinds of things, type this in the chat. What kinds of things does a movie trailer tell you about the movie? And Nina, if you want to read those to me, write in the chat, what kinds of things does a movie trailer tell you about a movie? I'm going to give you guys a second because I've actually jumped off my screen here, so I need to get that back.
It can give you an idea of what is going to happen.
Yes.
It can
So
also it can also give you idea if it's going to be exciting or a slow love story.
exactly. So a movie trailer is designed to give you an idea who are the characters, what kind of movie is this? Is it a comedy? Is it a love story? And you know what else it does? It hooks you. It makes you want to go watch the movie. So when we think of previewing, we want to think about things that we can do. So pre-teaching can like teaching the same thing that's about to come or reteaching the things that we just did can be kind of boring. Previewing instead changes it. It says, why do you want to learn about this? What's the hook? Let's build your capacity to learn and understand that. Let's teach the vocabulary that you're going to be using, or let's teach some of the concepts and skills that you would need to be able to hang with that core content class. So previewing and providing scaffolds during the class are your best ways to accelerate students. So this double dose idea. So if you have a student for intervention or for a special education pullout or some type of option for a double dose, what could that look like? And we see that in things like a study lab or after school tutoring or high intensity tutoring. So here's the tip that came out of a study of all the U.S. Department of Ed, is a meta-analysis of about 700 schools, some of which scored exemplary and some of which did not. And they said, what did people do differently? And this is what they found. The double dose could look like 1 to 2 days or 30% of your period being spent on all of that grade level stuff that we have to do, like the students failing, they didn't complete their work, like they need just some quick reteaching of some particular little thing that they were doing that day. But the majority of your time, if you have them 5 days a week for 3 to 4 days of that time, or at least 60 to 70% of the class time that you have them for a double dose, that's when you want to preview the vocabulary, build advanced organizers to help them be able to hang in that classroom and build their prior knowledge to do so. And so that's just something that when I used to be working with really like scheduling and special ed specific type of things and intervention layouts, that's really helpful to me because we often struggle with this pool because we want to make sure they're passing their courses, but we also know we need to back up and help them, sometimes even remediation on that side. But really the majority of your time needs to be spent helping them be ready, previewing what's to come in their regular class. So the second area is to increase belonging. How do we do that? So what we know is that student connectedness, and someone already mentioned that in one of our little Jamboard prompts, increasing connectedness increases the likelihood that students will be engaged and will have positive outcomes from school. So how do we do that? So some specific ways to increase connectedness would be the adult support. So that's just this idea that there's interest and time dedicated to, especially around social emotional learning, those types of support. Positive peer groups. How can we support that? So obviously, anytime there's pro-social peer groups, that tends to have a strong effect on how students behave, especially adolescents. But I've seen in middle and high schools, groups created such as lunch bunches. Or I even had one counselor, she would run a knitting club after school, and it was ways that they used to get every kid connected, and they would target it towards those who were most disconnected. Also, the commitment to education, which part of that is the relevance. And someone had mentioned that in one of our post-it notes. So we know, especially the older we get, making your content relevant to future post-secondary outcomes, college and career readiness, and feel like it's actually meaningful to their lives, that's when you'll increase their commitment. And finally, the school environment. If your school is operating with this really harsh, punitive culture, students will be less engaged and less connected to the school. So I wanted to share a few specific ways that we can increase connectedness. And the first one being a one and done. So this would be, for example, if you think back for a second, when maybe a teacher or someone in a school did something that really stood out to you in some way, that really connected with you and made you feel cared for and helped you. So everybody stop and think about that for a second, an experience they may personally have had or have seen a student have. Does anybody want to unmute and have it and share an example of that? Or maybe type it in the chat. I'll give you just a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and give one while we're waiting. So please continue if you're typing in the chat. I personally remember being in about fifth or sixth grade at an elementary school, and my parents were going through a divorce. And I remember the counselor, who I really had very little interaction with, came and pulled me out of class one day and brought me to her office and said, "Christy, is everything okay with you?" And I remember I just busted out crying and sharing what was happening at home. And when I think back about that now, I think about, because I still remember that occasion, and I was very fortunate. I did not have a lot of childhood trauma or huge barriers in my life. So this was, one specific instance in which I was going through a hard time. And I remember just looking back now, though, as an adult, I think, how did she know something was up? And for her to have taken time out to just directly address that, I just think it was so meaningful. And it was so meaningful to me then, even with as much of a support system as I had, I still remember her doing that. Were there any others to share, Nina? Okay, we'll let you all off the hook then. I'll keep us moving. 2 for 10. Invest 2 minutes per day for 10 consecutive days with a student that needs the connection the most. So guess what that means? That would be like the guy back there with his hood up, who's most disengaged, the one that you may even think, look, if he's not making any trouble, we're just going to leave it as it is. That's the one that you want to get connected with. That's the one that you got to think, all right, if I get you on my side, you're going to bring this whole little crew that kind of follows you with you. So that is the student that you want to try to connect with. And one way to do that, research tells us, is investing 2 minutes per day for at least 10 consecutive days. So guess what you can talk about during that time? Not school. It has to be the other things besides school. And so that might be about their pets, their sports, their video games, their shoes, things that are important to that student. And finally, 3 and 30, discover 3 things other than their name about every student you have in your class. That's highly recommended the first 30 days. And let me give you a tip to do so. I had a boss one time that my birthday rolled around and he laid 100 grand on my desk, candy bar. And why that was so significant is because I'm not a big candy eater, but I do love 100 grand. And so I said to him, like, how did you know? Why did you get that particular candy bar? And he's like, well, you mentioned it one time and I just made a note of it. So, first of all, that's a little stalker. But this idea that he probably has a notes page in which he has specific notes about things that people like, or maybe the name of their dog, or stories that they've shared that you can refer back to, those are really great ways to connect with someone and to make them feel special. So those are 3 specific ways we know that we can increase connectedness, especially with those students who are most disconnected. I'm going to keep us moving. What about encouraging autonomy? And let me make sure I have not, let's hop over to our digital agenda for a moment though, and look at our resources for, one second, my screen's getting wonky with everything. So let's hop over to the digital agenda, and under encouraging belonging, you will see some resources. First of all, a great summary around school connectedness. I want to point out there's a relationship matching activity. I have done that even with high schools. So be sure to check that one out. Some helpful tools from the Pritchard Committee on family engagement. And I've also listed, some schools have gotten, you may have visited the Ron Clark Academy, for example. Some schools have gotten good about bringing in music into their classrooms and into their schools. So what that can look like would be, I had an elementary school, for example, they brought in a drum set, so they started playing music and during lots of events. But a simpler version of that, I had an elementary school recently that they started playing music just in the mornings on the way to classes. And they were so struck. They thought it would create chaos and be loud and like overwhelming for everyone, when in fact the opposite was happening. They were finding that kids seemed just happier and walking to their classes and smiling. And this power of music in connecting with kids is something that is underutilized in our schools. So I did share a couple of resources around incorporating music into the classroom in the school. So be sure to check those out. All right. So finally, encouraging autonomy. How do we do that? All right. So I love to introduce this idea of station teaching, especially for intermediate, middle, and high schools. And I do that through Catlin Tucker's resources. I think they are so strong and so awesome. If you've not checked them out, I'm going to introduce you to her website, which is great, super practical. And she shares her resources on Google, where literally you can click make a copy and then edit it and use it yourself. So it's awesome in that way. So station teaching, let's talk about station teaching for a second. So, that's basically what we've often used in elementary schools, which could be like centers. But what's the purpose of station teaching? And I'll just, again, as we're looking at this visual here, so some kind of setup in which we have the instructors with a small group, we have an independent learning station, we have maybe small group teaming over here with partners, and then maybe a computer station. So on and offline stations are a great way to do that. The benefits of station teaching are that they take more time to build and initiate and plan. But then over time, what you've done is you will shift the cognitive load from you as a teacher who might be up here in a lecture style setup to where the students are using their brains and their power to do the work, when you actually now get to pull a small group of kids. So that really creates an environment for you to differentiate. It increases autonomy, especially when you bring choice into those kinds of station teaching activities. So one particular blog that I've encouraged here is a beautiful one for secondary, because I see many times that secondary schools think that that's not something that they can make happen in their school. So this one shows you specific ways to set up a station rotation in math, in English, in history, in science. And so you can literally go to these documents and make copies and edit. So she gives specific ideas for doing so and explains kind of the rationale and tips for making this better, such as setting a timer, such as video recording the instructions, such as creating either homogeneous or heterogeneous groups, depending on the purpose of that particular lessons. And you can have students name their groups, for example. So there's ways to really increase the effectiveness of this. I've also included just one example of a project choice board that she's created that, looky here, I can literally say, make a copy and make this into my own. And so this could be something that is one of the options at one of the stations. So it provides this control, this choice, this autonomy that can increase motivation for students. So I encourage you all to check out those great Catlin Tucker resources right there. Also, if you have not before, I wanted to share these resources around gamification. So I was in a science class, I think it was one year at a high school level. And when we walked in, immediately there was like engagement and almost tension in the classroom. The students were already kind of like not fussing, but like going back and forth at each other. They had created these two worlds in this science class and they were competing against each other. And so based on homework completion, behavior, things like that, they got points and they could spend the points. And they had created these two groups in the classroom that were competing. And so this gamification of a classroom can be done in lots of ways, just through a lesson, or it can be broader, like the one that he had created, this particular teacher had created for the whole semester. But Ditch That Textbook is this beautiful website. I'm such a huge fan of this guy that runs this, and I've forgotten his name. And this is just one particular resource on here. He has tons, and he does conferences online and things like that. He does a great job. So gamification, he shares specific ways to gamify the classroom. And it can be something as simple as making a study guide through a Jeopardy board, and he provides the Jeopardy board for you. And these are all free resources. Game shows. He just does a great job at increasing engagement, pulling us out of textbooks and lectures, and gamifying your classroom. So what a great way to make students more like give the hook for wanting to come and wanting to learn. And finally, I mentioned, oh yeah, I've shared just a couple of my other favorite digital resources like creating social studies notebooks. Anyway, you guys know a lot of these great resources are out there, and that's what I wanted to bring your attention to. But UDL and Universal Design for Learning is another way to help you create multiple means for engagement. So I've added that link as well. So let's hop back over to our root causes page. If you would go to page 3, and let's see, we dug down into, we were looking into possible drivers for struggling academically. And we got down to, well, maybe there's a lack of interest. So let's do that now. What are some reasons why there may be for a lack of student interest? You guys take a moment, pull a Post-it note over here and tell me some reasons for students to lack interest in what's happening in the classroom. Yep, can't see a connection with their real life. I'm going to add a few. So we've started drumming up some ideas, and some of them may still feel out of our control, like maybe there are home situations happening, but some maybe could be within our control. Like I can't see a connection with my future. So some secondary schools have done things such as career academies, in which they have within the pathways, they actually run their English and math courses and put a spin of that career pathway on their core classes. I've seen, I mentioned things like, is the teacher's primary method of teaching lecture? For those of you, if you think about a day that you went to a full day conference and you walked to this room and you sat and you listened for an hour, and then you walked to this room and you sat and listened for an hour, at the end of the day, how did you feel? Like mind numbing, exhausted. And if we ever actually followed a student through their day to see how that feels to walk to the classroom, sit, not allowed to talk, maybe occasional partner conversation, then we can't talk too long in class because we have to hurry up and can't be tardy. So then we go to our next class. And then at lunchtime, maybe they've set the bell out because we were too loud, so we can't talk. Like we're spending hours with very little social interaction and very little engagement in the learning. So are there things that we can do to change the students' experience at school, such as gamification or student rotations, some of the things that actually increase engagement in a classroom? No future goals. So working with students individually, especially, I've been doing a lot with secondary. So I keep mentioning secondary because so many things are geared already towards elementary. But setting goals, monitoring their progress on goals can be really powerful ways to address that. So by digging a little deeper, I hope that we have pointed out that lack of student motivation is not always the student's problem or the student's issue. Instead, there are things that we can set up around the student that can impact their motivation. So I'm going to end on this story. And then before you go, I would ask that you would complete the post assessment on the bottom of the digital agenda. That's really helpful feedback for us. And it just takes a couple minutes. So be sure to click that post assessment, and maybe Nina can put that in the chat as well to complete that before you go. And before you go, if you would like ELA credit, you can just reach out to our team, respond to one of the emails you received about this training this afternoon, and request that ELA credit. So I want to end on this story because, like I said, I've been in the business now for many years. And one of my jobs a long time ago was transitioning students into school. So I would go to the homes of incoming 2.5, 3-year-olds, meet with the family, learn about the situation, and then come to the school and help the school prepare for this incoming student. So we were transitioning 2 to 3-year-olds into preschool. And I remember going into one home, and when I walked in, the mom said to me, Dr. Bryce, I don't really know what you all are going to do because we had to nail the window shut in our home so he doesn't escape the house. And so I'm over here like, nail window shut. And I'm thinking I need to go to the preschool teacher and like share this information with the preschool teacher. So, we did our best. We created the best plan that we could with this student. And he walks in and he really struggles. And this preschool teacher is like, oh my gosh, what do we do here? And I want to pause that part of the story, and I want to take you to your personal goal setting. I want you to think. So we got this kid over here who's about to roll into preschool. And so we've got these big goals for him. So you think about for a second goals you set. You think about maybe for your New Year's resolution. Maybe you said, I'm going to cut back on eating or drinking or smoking or whatever. And is your trajectory like this? Straight up positive arrow. Like we wish. No, more like if you're lucky, it's like that. So, sometimes you're like, yeah, I'm getting to the gym. And then you're like, forget it. We're just getting pizza tonight. You're like, all right, I'm going to do good again. We're starting to walk. All right, it's been a bad day. Give me the Doritos. Like you do these things. So hopefully you work towards, but then you drop back down and you just keep trying, you drop back down. But overall, you have this positive trajectory. So let's return back to my little guy starting preschool. So we set all these big goals, one of these great things, and he struggled. So we move on to kindergarten. Kindergarten teacher's like, oh my, I've heard about you. So we work real hard, build these plans, do all we can, and he continued to struggle in a lot of ways. First grade teacher, I've heard about him since preschool. Second grade teacher, of course they give him to me. They always give me the tough kids. Third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. Every year we worked really hard to create these plans to help this student be successful. And he struggled a lot. And the teachers each year struggled a lot. I was in that district long enough that I remember walking through Greenwood High School one day, and I saw that young man with his backpack going from class to class to class. And I thought, his preschool teacher doesn't get to see this. His kindergarten teacher doesn't get to see this. Each year, those teachers felt like they weren't making any progress. There was no growth. They were just stuck. He's still struggling. But over time, they were shaping his behavior. And so, what we have to believe as teachers is even though all we see is this one piece of the child's life, like you can't judge a student's book by the chapter you walk in on. Instead, like we all just got to hold hands. We got to believe the things that we're doing really make a difference. And we try our best with these strategies, even though we're going to still hit some roadblocks and they're going to still struggle. But over time, you shape behavior. So I challenge you all to do that. I appreciate your time this afternoon, and we will cut it short there. Please complete the post assessment. And I hope that you will use this time to go back to some of those resources and think about what you can try in your classroom. So I will stay on, and please feel free to unmute, come on your video or whatever, but I'm sure you're very tired. You probably had a very long day teaching. So thank you for your time this afternoon. And I'll end us on some music.
Sitting, waiting, wishing you believe in superstitions. They may be deceived for something. Lord knows that this world is cruel, and ain't the Lord. I'm just a fool and another somebody don't love. Must I always be waiting on you?
Well, Nina, thank you for your time. You have a good night, and I'll catch up with you later.
Someone's a dancer, dance. I gave your friends all a chance. Put up with them wasn't worth ever had to do.